The cold, vast emptiness of space was only interrupted by the occasional flicker of distant stars. A fleet of alien warships drifted through the silence, their sleek, dark forms gliding across the stars. These ships were the pride of their race. The Zorvans, powerful and advanced, known throughout the galaxy for their technological superiority. They had conquered many worlds, fought countless battles, and had always come out victorious. But now, something strange was happening. A faint signal, an old, broken distress call, crackled through the communication systems of the fleet. It was weak, almost lost to the stars themselves. The aliens had almost dismissed it, thinking it was just space debris or another old signal from some forgotten civilization. But when their lead officer, Commander Rock, ordered the signal to be traced, something unusual happened. The signal had been coming from a sector of space they had never explored before. It was on the edge of known space, near a dark, uncharted region where few ships dared to venture. Most of the galaxy's civilizations had avoided this area, believing it to be too dangerous, too unpredictable. But the Zorvans, always curious and confident in their superiority, saw it as a challenge. Rack listened to the signal again, his dark eyes narrowing. It was unlike anything they had encountered. The voice, though faint, sounded human. It was broken and fragmented, but the words were clear enough. "Help! We are lost. Human. Warship. A human warship." Rack muttered under his breath, unsure whether to be amused or alarmed. Humans, a primitive race from a small, barely known planet, had never been seen as a real threat. Their technology was centuries behind the Zorvans, yet there was something in the tone of the signal that intrigued him. The commander ordered the fleet to change course, heading towards the signal source. As they approached the coordinates, the area seemed oddly empty. No signs of life. No other ships. Just the black void of space. It was too quiet for their liking. The human warship they were searching for was supposed to be a myth, a lost vessel that had disappeared long ago in a forgotten battle. No one really knew if it even existed, but the distress signal was real. And it was coming from that very warship, or so they thought. Rock gave the order to send a small scouting ship first. They would approach cautiously, as if this were any other salvage operation. The warship appeared on their sensors, but it was strange, dead silent. It had no active systems, no movement, and no life signs. The aliens felt sure this would be a simple mission. They would board the ship, assess its remains, and collect whatever technology or intelligence they could find. There was nothing to fear, or so they thought. As the Zorvan fleet prepared to enter the area, none of them knew they were about to make a grave mistake, one that would change everything they knew about power in the galaxy. The Zorvan fleet moved cautiously toward the source of the signal. Their ships, advanced and precise, cut through space with an eerie silence. Commander Rock stood at the front of the command center, watching the monitors intently. The image of the human warship appeared on the screen, large, dark, and battered, drifting motionless in the cold emptiness of space. It was like a ghost from a forgotten era. The fleet had been designed to handle every kind of threat, from hostile alien races to natural disasters. But this was something different. No enemy ship in the galaxy was as quiet, as still, as this human warship. Rack frowned, uneasy but not willing to show it. The warship seemed like it had been abandoned long ago, its weapons powered down, its systems inactive. Yet the signal still pulsed weakly from within. Rack ordered a small team to board the warship. A few Zorvan soldiers, experts in salvage operations, readied their equipment. They were well-trained, capable of dealing with anything. An empty vessel, a trap, or a surprise from whatever strange humans could have left behind. "We'll find answers," Rock said, more to himself than to anyone else. He didn't want to admit it, but a small part of him was nervous. What if this wasn't a simple salvage mission? What if the humans had a trick up their sleeves? The boarding craft approached the warship, its thrusters silent against the deep quiet of space. The Zorvans had seen it all, advanced alien civilizations, ancient ruins, dangerous creatures. But this human warship felt different. The outer hull was battered and worn, showing signs of age. There were scorch marks from what looked like long-forgotten battles. But the ship was intact, and there was something oddly intimidating about the way it floated in the void. The boarding craft's hatch opened, and the team stepped onto the cold, metal floors of the warship. The air inside was stale, but it was breathable. Everything was as it should be, except for the silence. There were no signs of life, no crew members moving about, no emergency lights flashing, just the eerie hum of the ship's engines, almost as if they were asleep, waiting for something. The Zorvans spread out, scanning the ship's interior. They quickly confirmed that the ship's systems were offline, and there were no signs of the humans or anything that could threaten them. Yet the longer they explored, the more unsettling the ship felt. The walls, the corridors, everything was dark, as though it had been abandoned for decades. And yet there was a strange, lingering energy in the air, something that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. One of the soldiers, a tall Zorvan named Joreth, reached for a console. As his fingers brushed against it, the ship seemed to awaken, its systems coming online with a soft, low hum. The lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the dark metal surfaces. The alien soldiers froze, their senses suddenly alert. "It's alive," Joreth whispered, a note of shock in his voice. But just as quickly, the ship fell silent again. Everything seemed to stop. The team exchanged uneasy glances. They were deep inside the human warship now, and the mystery of its silence was starting to turn into something far more unsettling. Why had it come back to life? And who, or what, was still aboard? As they continued to explore the warship's dark corridors, they had no idea that this seemingly abandoned vessel was anything but empty. The real battle was about to begin. The Zorvans moved cautiously through the corridors of the human warship, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The ship, once lifeless, now hummed with an eerie energy. The lights flickered back on, casting a dim glow over the dark interior. The air was heavy, stale with the scent of old machinery, but something felt different. It felt as if the ship was watching them, waiting. Commander Rock, still aboard his flagship, watched the situation unfold on his monitors. His sharp eyes narrowed as the boarding team continued to explore. He had ordered the crew to be careful, yet something about this human warship was off. His instincts, honed through countless battles, told him that this wasn't a simple derelict ship. "What's happening on the warship?" Rock demanded, his voice tense. One of his officers responded, "It seems the systems are coming online, Commander. The lights are back on, but there's no sign of life." Rock clenched his fists, trying to control this growing frustration. "Continue the operation, but I want those systems fully analyzed. Report back to me immediately if anything unusual happens." Meanwhile, on the warship, Joreth, the lead Zorvan soldier, continued his search through the darkened hallways. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He turned a corner and froze. Ahead of him, a door creaked open by itself, its metal hinges groaning under the strain. Joreth's hand instinctively reached for his weapon. The door led to what appeared to be the bridge of the warship. The room was vast, with large windows that overlooked the dark expanse of space. The strange, unsettling energy in the air seemed to be coming from here. Joreth stepped cautiously into the room, his eyes scanning every corner. The control panels were covered in dust, and the once bright screens were dim. But there, in the center of the room, was a massive control console. It was old and beaten, but it seemed to pulse with a strange, faint light. He reached out, hesitating for a moment, before pressing a button on the console. Instantly, the entire room came to life. The lights brightened to their full intensity, and the ship's engines hummed to life. The Zorvans in the hallway heard the sudden surge of power and rushed to the bridge, weapons drawn. But as they entered, they stopped in their tracks. The warship's engines, which had once been silent, now roared to life. The massive, heavy weapon systems, previously dormant, flickered with energy. It was as if the ship had awakened from a deep slumber, fully aware of the intruders. Joreth's breath caught in his throat. The ship was no longer passive. It was alive, responding to the actions of the Zorvans in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It was as if the warship had a mind of its own. Suddenly, a loud mechanical sound filled the air. The warship's large weapons, located near the ship's core, began to shift into position. The Zorvans had activated something they couldn't control. The realization hit them all at once. The human warship was not just a ship, it was a weapon. "We need to get out of here," one of the soldiers shouted, but it was already too late. The ship, once thought to be lifeless, was now fully operational, and it was preparing for battle. Back on Rock's flagship, alarms began blaring. The human warship had locked onto their fleet. It was preparing to fire. The atmosphere inside the human warship was thick with tension. The Zorvans stood frozen in disbelief as the ship around them came to life. The low hum of the engines reverberated through the metal floors, and the dim lights flickered as the warship powered up. It was no longer an abandoned relic. It was a weapon, a deadly force that had been dormant for far too long. And now, it was awake. Joreth, standing at the bridge, felt a chill run down his spine. His mind raced with confusion. How had this ship, seemingly forgotten by time, become so powerful? The Zorvans had only ever heard rumors of humanity's primitive, clumsy technology, but this ship was anything but primitive. It was advanced, far beyond anything they had ever encountered. "What is it doing?" one of the Zorvan soldiers asked, his voice trembling with fear. Rock, still aboard his flagship, watched in growing horror as the human warship powered up its weapons systems. His fleet had been caught completely off guard. The Zorvans had underestimated the human ship's potential, believing it to be a mere relic of a forgotten war. Now, they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The human warship's massive weapon systems began to align. Large, powerful cannons rotated into position, their barrels glowing with ominous energy. The Zorvans had only moments before it unleashed its power. "We need to move." Rock barked into his communicator, his voice sharp with urgency. "Prepare the fleet for battle. Now." But it was too late. With a deafening roar, the human warship fired. A massive beam of energy shot out from its weapon, cutting through space with incredible speed and precision. The light from the shot was blinding, and the shockwave rattled the Zorvan ships. The beam struck one of the Zorvan warships, tearing through its shields and armor like paper. The Zorvan ship didn't stand a chance. It exploded in a burst of fire and debris, sending shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The remaining Zorvan fleet scrambled to respond, their communications filled with chaos and panic. They had never seen anything like this before. A single shot had taken out one of their most powerful ships in an instant. Joreth watched in stunned silence, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The human warship had acted with incredible precision. It wasn't just a ship, it was a predator. And they were the prey. "Fall back! Fall back!" one of the other Zorvan soldiers shouted, his voice shaking with fear. Rock's face turned pale as he watched the devastation unfold. He had always believed in the superiority of the Zorvans, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The humans, it seemed, were capable of far more than he had ever given them credit for. In a panic, the Zorvan fleet began to retreat, trying to escape the devastating firepower of the human warship. But it was no use. The warship's weapons were too fast, too powerful. It locked onto the retreating ships, firing shot after shot, dismantling the Zorvans' advanced fleet one vessel at a time. Rock's voice cracked over the communicator as he called for a full retreat. "Get us out of here. Now!" he screamed. But the damage had been done. The Zorvans had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The human warship had shown them the full extent of its power, and the Zorvans were not prepared for it. The Zorvan fleet was in chaos. Rak stood at the helm of his flagship, staring at the destruction unfolding on his screens. The human warship had taken out one of their most powerful ships with a single devastating shot. The remaining vessels of the Zorvan fleet were scattered across the black void, their coordinated attack broken, their morale shattered. Rak's mind raced as he tried to understand what had just happened. The humans were supposed to be weak, primitive. How could they possess such incredible technology? How could a single ship, long believed to be a ghost, inflict so much damage? "Commander, we're losing ships fast," one of Rak's officers reported, his voice trembling. "We can't keep this up." Rak clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the situation. He had been in countless battles, but nothing like this. The human warship had outclassed them at every turn, but the Zorvans were not easily defeated. They had resources, technology, and above all, pride. They had been rulers of the galaxy for centuries, and they were not going to let a single human ship ruin that reputation. "Get us into position," Rak barked. "We're not running. We're going to destroy that ship." The remaining Zorvan ships began to regroup, their commanders rallying their crews. Despite the damage, the Zorvans had a vast arsenal at their disposal. They might have underestimated the human warship, but they still had the firepower to take it down. They weren't going to back down from a challenge. Rak gave the order for a full-scale assault. The Zorvans would hit the human warship from all sides, swarming it with their advanced weapons and overwhelming its defenses. The element of surprise had been lost, but they still had the advantage in numbers. As the Zorvan ships closed in, they unleashed everything they had. Blasts of energy and laser fire lit up the dark expanse of space, illuminating the battlefield in bright flashes. The human warship responded quickly, activating its own defenses with terrifying efficiency. Shield barriers flickered to life, deflecting the incoming fire with ease. The human ship moved with remarkable agility, dodging most of the attacks and returning fire with deadly accuracy. The Zorvans' offensive continued, but they were starting to feel the pressure. Every shot they fired seemed to bounce off the human ship's shields, and every attempt to break through its defenses ended in failure. The warship's advanced weaponry cut through the Zorvan fleet like a knife through butter, ripping apart ships with deadly precision. It was clear now that the Zorvans were outmatched. "We can't hold out much longer," one of Rak's officers shouted as their ship was hit by a series of powerful blasts. "We need to pull back, Commander." Rak's jaw tightened. He had never retreated from a battle in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. But the situation was growing more desperate with every passing moment. The Zorvans were fighting back as hard as they could, but their weapons couldn't match the human ship's devastating firepower. The alien fleet had been humiliated in their first encounter with the human warship, and now, as their ships were systematically destroyed, Rak could no longer deny the terrifying truth. They had underestimated the humans, and that mistake might just cost them everything. "We retreat," Rak said through gritted teeth. "Now." But the Zorvans were already on the verge of complete defeat. The once proud fleet was now a broken force, desperately trying to escape the wrath of the human warship that had come to dominate the battlefield. The Zorvans' once proud fleet was now in shambles. The human warship, a single vessel that had been thought of as an ancient ghost, had utterly destroyed their best ships with terrifying precision. The remaining Zorvan ships, battered and broken, were now scattered across the cold vastness of space, desperately trying to regroup and escape. Commander Rak's mind raced. He had fought in countless wars, faced entire armies, and conquered dozens of planets. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. A single human warship had torn his fleet apart, forcing him to consider a retreat for the first time in his career. "Commander, we can't keep up the fight," his second-in-command, Vorak, said, his voice strained with panic. "We need to leave. The human ship is too powerful." Rak's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with fury. "No. "We do not retreat." His voice was low and cold. "We will destroy that ship. We will show them that the Zorvans cannot be beaten." But the truth was undeniable. His fleet had already suffered heavy losses. The human warship had disabled their strongest ships with one shot. The advanced weapons they had relied on for years were ineffective against the human ship's defenses. For the first time in his life, Rock felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on him. "Get me the fleet's full tactical report," Rock ordered, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. "I want to know how we can win this." As the reports came in, Rock studied them closely. His mind worked fast, analyzing the situation. Despite the overwhelming power of the human warship, the Zorvans still had one advantage: their numbers. If they could work together, launch a coordinated assault, they might have a chance at overwhelming the human ship. But time was running out, and the damage to his fleet was mounting by the minute. Rock clenched his fists. He knew that any more attacks like the previous ones would result in complete destruction. They couldn't waste another opportunity. He needed to do something bold. He needed to show the humans that the Zorvans would not be so easily defeated. "Prepare the fleet for one final push," Rock ordered, his voice now sharp and decisive. "We will focus everything on that ship. All weapons, all forces. We overwhelm them." The Zorvan ships began to gather, all 20 remaining vessels aligning in formation. The once proud fleet was now a fraction of its former strength. But Rock had no choice. He had to fight. He had to win. The Zorvan ships locked onto the human warship with their weapon systems, preparing for the final assault. Every ship fired everything it had. Laser beams, missiles, plasma cannons, all aimed at the single target. The sky erupted with energy as the weapons hurtled through space, racing toward their target. For a moment, it seemed as though the human warship would finally fall. The Zorvans' coordinated attack was their most powerful yet, but the human ship's shields held strong. The blasts hit, but the ship barely flinched. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The Zorvans watched in horror as their most powerful weapons failed to make a dent in the human ship's defenses. It was clear now that their tactics had failed. The human warship had not only survived their initial assault, it had grown stronger. Rock's heart sank as he realized the true extent of his mistake. The Zorvans had made an enemy they couldn't defeat. The Zorvans were beginning to realize they had made a grave mistake. Despite their most powerful assault, the human warship stood unscathed, its shields holding strong against the barrage of laser beams, missiles, and plasma fire. The Zorvans had thrown everything they had at the ship, and it had shrugged off their attacks with terrifying ease. Commander Rock's heart raced as he watched the destruction unfold on his monitors. His fleet was in chaos. Their weapons were ineffective. The human warship was a force unlike anything the Zorvans had ever encountered. It wasn't just a ship, it was a predator. And the Zorvans were its prey. Rock's fists clenched as he stared at the battlefield. His fleet was failing, and his commanders were growing desperate. The once proud Zorvan warships were falling apart, their shields failing, their weapons silenced. The human warship had dominated the battlefield, and the Zorvans had no answers. But just as Rock thought the situation couldn't get any worse, something unexpected happened. The human warship moved. It wasn't much, just a small shift in position, but it was enough. In an instant, the human ship's weapon systems came online, locking onto the Zorvan ships. The Zorvans barely had time to react before the human warship unleashed its own counterattack. A massive burst of energy erupted from the warship's primary cannon. The beam of light was so bright it illuminated the entire battlefield, cutting through space with terrifying speed. The Zorvan fleet had no time to dodge. The beam hit one of the remaining warships dead-on, tearing through its shields and armor like paper. The ship didn't even have time to explode. It simply disintegrated, its fragments scattering across the stars. Rock's eyes widened in horror. The human warship's firepower was unmatched. It had just destroyed one of their most powerful ships in the blink of an eye. And now it was targeting another. The human ship fired again. This time, The beam hit another Zorvan vessel, completely obliterating it in a flash of light. The remaining Zorvan ships were now retreating in panic, their commanders shouting orders over the communication channels. But it was too late. The human warship had proven its dominance, and there was no escaping its wrath. Rock's voice cracked as he gave the order. Full retreat. Now, get us out of here. The Zorvans tried to flee, but the human warship wasn't finished. It pursued the retreating ships with incredible speed, firing more blasts, each one hitting its target with deadly accuracy. The Zorvans couldn't outrun the human ship. They couldn't outfight it. All they could do was try to escape. But the human warship was relentless. Rock watched as his fleet was decimated, one ship after another. His heart sank as he realized the truth. His fleet was no match for the human warship. The Zorvans, the once dominant force in the galaxy, had been humbled by a single human vessel. And it was clear now that the humans weren't just a threat. They were a new power to be reckoned with. As the last Zorvan ship fled the battlefield, Rock couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of fear and respect for the humans. They had shown the galaxy that they were no longer just a primitive race. The humans were a force to be feared, and the Zorvans would have to face the consequences of their underestimation. The battle was over. The Zorvan fleet, once a proud and powerful force in the galaxy, was in ruins. Of the 20 ships that had launched the initial assault, only a handful managed to limp away, battered and broken. The rest were destroyed, their hulking remains scattered across the void, drifting aimlessly in space. The human warship stood victorious, its guns silent for now, but its power unmistakable. Commander Rock, his face pale and grim, stood on the bridge of the last remaining Zorvan ship. The monitors before him displayed the aftermath of the battle. The Zorvans had suffered a crushing defeat. His once confident fleet was now a shadow of its former self. "We were defeated," Vorak, his second-in-command, said, his voice low. There was no pride left in him, no arrogance. The fear that had been building in him during the battle now fully consumed him. The humans, they are stronger than we ever imagined. Rock didn't respond at first. He couldn't. His mind was still processing the events of the past few hours, trying to make sense of it all. How had the humans, a race he had thought of as primitive, destroyed his fleet so easily? How had they turned the tide of battle with such overwhelming force? He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, his gaze was hard, filled with both anger and respect. "They are not what we thought," Rock finally said, his voice quiet but filled with authority. "They are more than just a threat. The humans, they have power." Vorak nodded solemnly. He knew this truth now, and it was a hard one to accept. For centuries, the Zorvans had been the most powerful race in the galaxy. They had conquered planets, fought wars, and destroyed enemies with ease. But now, for the first time, they had encountered a force that was capable of not just fighting back, but winning decisively. The Zorvans were no longer the dominant power. The humans had shown that. And the galaxy would never be the same again. As the Zorvan fleet limped back toward their homeworld, Rock couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gnawed at him. This wasn't just a defeat. This was a wake-up call. The humans had proven that they could stand against any enemy, no matter how powerful. And the Zorvans were only the first to feel the consequences of underestimating them. The Zorvans would not be the last. Across the galaxy, news of the human warship's victory began to spread. Rumors, stories, and whispers started to circulate among the various alien races. The humans, who had once been seen as a small, insignificant species, were now viewed with a mixture of awe and fear. As the Zorvans retreated, their leadership began to make plans. They would rebuild their fleet, adapt, and learn from their mistakes. But Rock knew it would take time, and by the time they were ready, the humans would have grown stronger. They would be prepared. The galaxy had just shifted on its axis. The humans were no longer a minor race. They had earned their place at the table of galactic power, and the other races would have to reckon with that reality. Rak looked out at the stars, his mind heavy with the weight of what had happened. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that no matter how powerful a race might be, it was always possible to underestimate the one you least expect, and that mistake had cost him everything. The humans were no longer just a footnote in history. They had become the new force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would have to deal with the consequences. The Zorvans had barely escaped with their lives, their fleet broken and scattered across the galaxy. The humans, with their mysterious warship, had shattered their confidence and left them with a deep sense of fear and respect. But while the Zorvans limped back to their homeworld, recovering from their wounds, something bigger was happening across the galaxy. News of the Zorvans' defeat spread quickly, carried by fleets of alien ships and through whispers in the shadows of intergalactic trade routes. No one could ignore the truth. The humans had emerged from the unknown and struck down one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. A new player had entered the galactic stage, and the balance of power was shifting. For centuries, the Zorvans had ruled, their technology, military might, and sheer dominance going unchallenged. Other races in the galaxy had either bowed to their power or kept their distance. But now, the humans had taken a bold step forward, showing that they were not to be underestimated. The Zorvans, once unchallenged, now had to contend with the humans, a force they had never even considered a threat. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, alien leaders gathered to discuss the humans. Some were afraid. Some saw them as an opportunity. And some, like the Draxians, were already making plans. They knew that the Zorvans would try to rebuild, but they also understood that the humans had a power that could not be ignored. They might have been a new force, but they were a force that could shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. On the homeworld of the Zorvans, Rock paced in his war room, his mind clouded with frustration and anger. His fleet had been humiliated, and it would take years to rebuild the forces they had lost. But he knew that the galaxy was changing. The humans had proven themselves as something more than a small, insignificant race. They had shown that they could fight back, and fight back hard. "We must adapt," Rock said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We cannot afford to make the same mistake again. The humans are not just another race to conquer. They are a new threat, and we must be ready." His officers nodded in agreement, though their faces were filled with doubt. The human warship had been unlike anything they had seen. It was too powerful, too unpredictable. The Zorvans had underestimated humanity, and it had cost them dearly. But now, they had to find a way to counter the human strength. They would need new tactics, new weapons, and a new way of thinking. Far across the galaxy, human leaders watched the unfolding events with interest. They had always known that they were different from the other races, but now they could see that their place in the galaxy was being shaped by their actions. The humans had proven that they could stand against the most powerful forces in the universe, and they would not back down. But this was only the beginning. Humanity's rise to power was only just beginning. The galaxy had been turned on its head, and no one knew what the future held. The Zorvans would rebuild, but so would humanity. The humans would continue to grow stronger, and their influence would spread across the stars. The galaxy had seen the power of human determination, and it would never be the same. The age of the Zorvans was ending. A new era was beginning. And humanity, once a small and unknown species, had just shown the galaxy that they were here to stay. The galaxy was no longer the same. The defeat of the Zorvans had sent shockwaves through every corner of space, and for the first time in centuries, the dominant power in the galaxy was no longer the Zorvans. It was humanity. The once overlooked primitive species had proven itself to be a force like no other, and the entire galaxy was beginning to take notice. On Earth, leaders and military commanders gathered to discuss the future. The victory over the Zorvans had changed everything. The news of their triumph had spread across the stars, and now humanity stood at the crossroads of its greatest challenge and opportunity. The warship that had led the charge, a symbol of humanity's newfound power, was the key to their future. But there was more to this victory than just firepower. It was about what the humans represented: resilience, ingenuity, and determination. General Marcus Hale, one of the key leaders of the human forces, stood at the front of the meeting room. He was an experienced commander, but even he could not fully comprehend the magnitude of what humanity had just accomplished. The Zorvans were known for their technological superiority, their fleet of warships and powerful weapons. And yet, humanity had beaten them. Not just once, but decisively. "We've proven that we are not to be underestimated," Hale said, his voice steady but filled with pride. "This is just the beginning. We've shown the galaxy that humanity can stand against anyone." The room fell silent as the officers and politicians around him processed the words. There was excitement in the air, but also caution. What would the Zorvans do next? What would other alien races think? There was no turning back now. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, and it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same again. Elsewhere in the galaxy, alien leaders and commanders were making their own plans. The Zorvans, though wounded, were still a formidable force, and they had begun the difficult task of rebuilding. But they had learned a painful lesson. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. The other races, once content to live in the shadow of the Zorvans, now faced the reality that they too would have to contend with humans. Some began to approach Earth, seeking alliances, while others, more cautious, prepared for the possibility of future conflict. But for now, humanity stood at the top. The human warship, once a forgotten relic, now symbolized the potential of humanity's future. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was here, and they were not going anywhere. Back on Earth, the leaders discussed their next steps. They would build stronger ships, develop new technologies, and prepare for whatever came next. The victory over the Zorvans had given humanity the confidence to move forward, but they knew the galaxy was full of dangers. They had just defeated one of the most powerful races in the universe, but there would be more challenges ahead. General Hale looked out of the window, his eyes scanning the stars. He could see the possibilities, endless, vast, and full of potential. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy, and now it was time to shape the future. "Let's make sure the galaxy knows who we are," Hale said, turning back to the room. "This is just the beginning. Humanity is here to stay."